So in 2021, La La Land Records released a limited edition soundtrack of Friday the 13th Part 8 Jason Takes Manhattan, capping off their full run of the Paramount-owned first 8 Friday the 13th films as full soundtracks. First up, getting all the stuff that Harry Manfredini did for the first several films, but then as you get into Part 7 there, you kind of pivot from a bunch of Manfredini library tracks, and then Fred Mullen, who had been working on the Friday the 13th television series, him coming in and kind of scoring a bunch of stuff to kind of complement that and supplement it. But as you get into Part 8, Fred Mullen fully took over scoring duties for the entire film, and you get in this entire thing where there had been a previous soundtrack released in 2005, but it's noted as saying new digital recording, so that kind of implies that this would be the first time that the original soundtrack recordings have been officially released. And it's the very interesting thing that the whole thing contains 67 minutes worth of music with a lot of tracks that he recorded as score for the film, but got a lot of tracks that were like rock tracks, pop tracks, stuff like that in the entire film, where they're kind of leaning into that more and more as they got all the fantastic Alice Cooper tracks for Part 6. Not as much for 7, but you get into 8, doing the entire thing where they're trying to go for this New York vibe and trying to steer towards a new setting for Jason to kind of run amok in, and obviously a lot of things didn't go off to their fullest potential because they didn't have the money in the budget to kind of do a lot more elaborate set pieces, so they got stuck on a cruise ship for about 80% of the film or something like that. So a lot of people are kind of disappointed how the thing turned out towards the ends of what you would have expected from that concept, and things get a little bit filtered down and kind of diluted and all that type of stuff, plus all the stuff from the MPAA cutting into the censorship of gory horror films, not leaving a lot on the bone to kind of enjoy for the entire film. But the film has its own fan base, and a lot of people love it and kind of enjoy it for as much of a camp type of film as it is. But as the entire thing went on, getting into the whole thing again, a lot of stuff kind of transitioning from that Friday the 13th television series, which is kind of like just aping off the name value and has absolutely nothing to do with the entire film franchise. But again, another thing that has its own cult following. It's got a DVD release and has been very well liked. I haven't seen it in a lot of years, but I'd like to go back and check it out over time and whatnot. But the fact is, Frank Mancuso Jr., one of the producers of the franchise, kind of shifted off into doing the television series, but kind of called a couple people in from production managers and executive supervisors, stuff like that. A lot of people are kind of getting into the film franchise through the television series, like Rob Hedden, writer of the entire film, worked on a bunch of episodes, writing stuff and directing a couple episodes, and of course worked with Fred Mullen, who had been doing all the scoring duties on the series. So a lot of people easily transitioning this whole thing. They already had a good working relationship to kind of just hash things out and get excited for things. They kind of have an easy way of dealing with things. But it's the kind of the interesting type of things where Fred Mullen was so enthusiastic about the entire thing, be able to kind of be a little bit more freed up in a certain way, because on New Blood, he's trying to at least kind of complement the sort of library tracks you had for Manfredini, and trying to do stuff that maybe does introduce some new flavors, new sounds, whatnot, but you're still trying to kind of transition between the two things in some places, and here or there about how effective that is. To me, they kind of stand out what the stuff you're sourcing from Part 6, kind of melding in with his more kind of synth-heavy, kind of percussive type of stuff. But on this one, he could just open it up completely and just do pretty much whatever he felt like doing. He didn't have to mesh in with anything else, so he felt very much freeing in doing just these very heavy sort of industrial sounds to a certain degree. Just like I said, a lot of heavy percussion, kind of ambient melodies he's getting in there in some places. Was you could feel a different change from the shrieking strings and a lot more organic sounds. Manfredini did is going much more towards keyboard synthesizers, stuff like that for Mullen's work here. Just he's trying to just go for a little bit more harder edge, a little bit more bombastic sensibility about the entire thing. Just in a way, it's a very good score complementing the film in such ways, but it's not one of those things you put on to have an easy listening experience, or kind of a moody sort of thing. It's you put on maybe a John Carpenter score, or something like that. Listen like the soundtrack to The Fog. Wonderful atmospheric type of stuff. You can get soaked into it to a certain degree. This one's a lot more kind of very bangy, very kind of explosive type of stuff in various places, so not quite as much of a thing you really kind of put on as a soundtrack to kind of ease into things, but it still has a certain quality to it that does evoke all the imagery for the film. There are a lot of things in terms of technical issues with the mix that Fred Mullen did have, because him and Stan Meisner, who had done a lot of the co-composing, a lot of the songs on the entire film, went up to a screening of the film and they just were kind of horrified by the sound mix. Apparently theatrically, The Darkest Side of the Night that opens the film, that track, they originally put some weird flange effect on the whole thing, and man, it freaked them out like living hell, just like they didn't know what the hell they were listening to. And Bolan said that he really doesn't go back and watch the film because he feels like his score was not treated well, represented well in the film mix. He just feels like it was pushed down too much to favor sound effects and other different things. He just doesn't feel like it really came to life as much as he put effort into it. He didn't feel like the sound mix kind of favored it to a certain degree, even though the flange effect on Darkest Side of the Night apparently got fixed to a certain degree, especially by the time they get up the DVD, and especially the Blu-rays, you're not hearing that effect whatsoever, whether it's on the stereo track or the remix 5.1. That's not there anymore. They kind of filtered it out to a certain degree at a certain point in time, but it feels like it just didn't quite hit as strongly. But I've always felt like to me, it always felt like the soundtrack did come through very strongly. I feel like everything I'm listening to on the soundtrack sounds very representative of how I've at least remembered the film since DVD onwards, to get a very good sensibility of being very forefront in the mix and stuff like that. So maybe he feels differently. Maybe he hasn't watched it in a long time. They can see if the Dolby Digital or the DTS Master Audio mixes have gotten much more of a forefront quality to his sound mix. I don't know. But the good thing getting up onto the soundtrack release is that Fred Bolan still has original DAT masters, his digital audio tapes, where the entire score was recorded onto a 24-track analog tape, then mixed down into a 2-track analog tape, and then, of course, put onto that tape. So he still had those, and apparently digital audio tapes is a bit antiquated to a certain degree. So it's like, I know a band that I've had regular relations with, they had a live recording recorded onto DAT tapes, and they haven't been able to do anything with them because you can't find the machines anymore because they're very much outdated. So it's like, it was kind of a here-there thing about whether or not there's going to be like dropouts, or they're going to have some problems with jamming or something like that. Apparently, the tapes went just as smooth as butter through the entire transfer process, no problems whatsoever. Came out sounding fantastically. And so the entire thing just, there's a lot of good qualities. Just the master of this whole thing just sounds wonderful. I think it just sounds very much representative, plus it adds more on it because you don't have all the layers of dialogue and the sound effects and other things they're doing on the whole thing. But Bolan was very kind of conscious of, like, he didn't want to put that Jason vocal effect into the score itself. He kind of want to leave that up to the filmmakers and the mixers and the editors and stuff like that to kind of figure out where they want to drop that in. So the score is actually free of that vocal effect. And though they kind of fashioned a brand new one right at the beginning of the opening Paramount logo, there's a kind of like that Jason type of thing. So they worked around with a couple different new synthesized sounds in that regard, which I think aids the entire score. It just kind of melds in so well. They kind of update to a certain degree. Again, like the whole scores being a little more synthesized, a little more percussive, stuff like that, getting away from a little less of an organic sound. So it's kind of nice to kind of have a new sort of fangled sound in that regard to kind of identify Jason and stuff like that. So kind of an interesting type of thing how he just decided, like, I'm just going to do the music. They can deal with all the other stuff on their own. What's the interesting thing with all the kind of like the pop rock tracks in the entire film, that most famous one is probably The Darkest Side of the Night, because it gotten released before in like 2000 on an album called The Power of the Night from Metropolis. It wasn't terribly easy to grab a hold of. You probably found rips online here, there, whatnot, but kind of getting an official release and getting it back on there is like right from the masters and everything that Fred Bolan provided. Really good type of thing. It's like they put on the proper version with the vocals and the lyrics, stuff like that, but they ended the album with a full instrumental version. So it's kind of a nice, just a nice variety in that regard. But they had vocals done by Peter Ferret, and like I said, Stan Meisner and Fred Molan composed the track, and they very much love the quality it came out of. It was just kind of a perfect thing. It identifies the film very well, very much in a different type of way. It's the first time a Friday film that opened with kind of like a pop track at the front of it, kind of setting a different mood. And how people feel about that is kind of an up in the air type of thing, but I've always kind of liked the track, and it's like kind of a good type of thing. But it was just such a thing that this release just has those unreleased tracks. Broken Dream, fantastic. The thing was, the word going around, apparently even from Fred Molan himself and Stan Meisner, was like they didn't have a full recording of the track. We always thought there was like whatever we got in the film was all there ever was. But there were kind of like things here and there. It's like apparently another thing that was kind of produced in Toronto and Canada and stuff like that was the 90s syndicated series Forever Night, and Fred Mullen did work on the whole thing, and they used an instrumental version of Broken Dream in the very first episode when the main character goes into this bar or whatnot. You can hear it in the background soundtrack of the whole thing. So it sounded, and listening back to it, it sounds like it's a little bit of a different tempo. I don't know what regard or whatnot. It sounds a little slower. But the fact is, we had some things here and there that kind of gave us a hint that maybe there's more to hear or whatnot. But once I got the CD and I listened to that track, hearing a new chorus, new breakdowns, new stuff in there, new guitar leads or whatnot, it's like wonderful. The mix does sound a little on the dated side, especially with the vocal reverb or whatnot. It feels a little less than awesome. Feels like it could be updated to a certain degree and be a little bit more clear, a little bit more punchy or whatnot, but I think it's still a good track. It's a really good track. I think if they released this thing as a single back in the day, it could have had a little bit of a life, but you got vocals from Terry Crawford, who was, again, I think it was a Canadian singer, vocalist or whatnot, so really good, really fantastic track. Of course, adding in JJ's Blues, a little rock thing that JJ's going off on the deck of the ship and everything like that with Wayne. Really good little piece there. So it's like, all these things people were trying to rip snippets of from the film, and you had to work with overlapping dialogue and sound effects, stuff like that. Now I got wonderful, clean tracks from high quality sources right from the masters. Sounds absolutely fantastic. And they had that kind of hip hop track in there, Living in the City, which is kind of okay, not really my thing. But they included it as well, because again, it's all from the same guys, so why not include it? But it's like such good type of things. That was really kind of things I really wanted. I really wanted to get those tracks that had never been released before. We just never really had an inkling, never really had a confirmation that there was actually more to hear from them, but actually knowing that they had complete versions. And plus, the Fred Mullen stuff is a good piece of work from the score itself. It has some nice melodies in there that kind of adds a little bit more into it. It's like he's playing with his own type of stuff, but still kind of making it recognizable to a certain degree as being involved with the franchise. So he's still transitioning, but still keeping it his own, but still making it familiar to a certain degree. I still think it really does aid the film. When there's a lot of things that got so hampered on the film. Like I said, the gore is pretty much gone. You don't have as good of makeup effects, especially on Jason himself, with Kane Hodder reprising the role, and various other things. There's a lot of stuff. It plays much more campy, less on the scares. Has some great, it still has iconic moments. The whole thing with Julius boxing Jason on the rooftop or whatnot, that's absolutely one of the franchise classic moments, all these different things. So it's still got a lot of good things. Still a lot of memorable qualities in though. It's kind of a joke of a film because it's kind of played that way, but the fact is if you want to go off and listen to the commentary myself and Steve Fraser did on the channel, it's actually a hilarious ride. That and the New Blood one we recorded the same night, and it's one of the best back-to-backs we've done. Jason Takes Manhattan just has it going right off the deep end because the entire film is just kind of ludicrous, and it takes some really bizarre and just ridiculous turns and whatnot, but still got a good heart with it, with the fans of the franchise here and there, and Scream Factory version really represents it very well on its proper encode, stuff like that. So I think it's a really good piece of work here from Fred Mullen. I think there's a really good soundtrack that we kind of check out. As I'm recording this, says it's temporarily out of stock. It was a limited edition to 2,000 copies, and that was, of course, about a year and a half ago. So, but the fact they put temporarily might say that they might reissue it at a certain point in time, maybe with a different packaging or maybe something else like that, because it has a really good booklet on the whole thing. Very, very informative. Great stills for the entire film. Great sort of liner notes in the whole thing. Coming from Brian Satterwhite, who is a film composer and an author. Talks a whole bunch about a lot of great things of the whole thing. Just does a great job getting excerpts from Stan Meisner and Rob Hedden and Fred Mullen and various other people involved in the entire thing, finding out exactly how the production went along, how the approach to the film went on, and kind of the reaction from the people involved with the whole thing, and of course how all the stuff moved together with the music of the film, how it composed, and how the reactions from Fred Mullen, the screening they went to and stuff like that, and kind of the legacy of the entire film. So this gets you some extra insight into his process, how he felt about the whole thing, all these different things. So I think it's a really, really good piece of work with the liner notes and the quality of the masters, and of course the unreleased tracks. Wonderful type of stuff. I think it's very much worthwhile. So if you can ever grab a hold of this, I think it's worthwhile. So if you are a collector for the Friday the 13th stuff, definitely grab this one. I think it's worthwhile. And if you ever get a chance to grab it on any regard, I definitely endorse it. So I think it's a really good release. And let me know what you guys think. If you grabbed the release, let Let me know what you thought about the tracks and unreleased material, all that type of stuff. So guys, there's always the Patreon to get a little early access around here and support the channel. And you can also support the channel through the Super Thanks feature here on YouTube to give a little something to us if you enjoy anything specifically on the channel. So guys, thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.